Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining the Forget Your Pizza Party podcast. My name is Chris, and as always, I'm joined by
Misty.
And this is episode 15, and today we're going to talk about how nurses eat their young, especially new grad RN and LPNs entering the workforce. It is a problem that I have seen firsthand, and I've also experienced. Just like most nurses, I would say that it's pretty fair that a lot of industries do this, but none so much where you're in a team environment like nursing and you have your seasoned nurses instead of mentoring and lifting up new grad RNs and LPNs. They actually tear them down to the point where you second guess why you're actually doing this in the first place. Misty, have you ever had anybody when you started actually do this to you?
Just wanted to take a break from the podcast and ask that if you like our show and the topics that Chris and I discuss, please like, subscribe, comment, and hit the notification bell. This will help get our content pushed out to more and more people like you. Now back to the podcast. When we started into the nursing role, there were a lot more seasoned nurses. Actually, I would probably say more seasoned than new. And they were brutal sometimes. They weren't exactly there to help guide. They leave you sinking, basically. They would also critique how you were doing your job, if things weren't done right. They were very, very harsh.
Any personal attacks?
I don't know that it was like necessarily personal. It was just maybe the way they came across in a report or not understanding something, I guess. Or
Where I saw it was specifically on the units where they had lifers or lifelong unit nurses. You know, the ones that are 10 plus years into their practice, same unit, never transitioned off, never moved into management as an assistant manager. They are just a lifelong staff nurse on a particular unit. And you would get these new grad RNs coming in and very naive in their practice, very young in their experience. And these nurses would actually, to some of their lifelong friends and colleagues, just start taking shots and personal attacks on these nurses. And of course, the nurses that are new can't hear them. This is just in their little petty groups that they would have. But outside of those petty groups, if they were dispersed among the unit and you had one of these lifelong nurses or lifer unit nurses on your particular wing or unit, and the new grad RNs or LPNs were assigned to that same wing, they wouldn't help. They would 100% critique them. They would blast them personally. They would blast their practice, and to the point where a lot of the new grads that I saw would actually question why they got into nursing. They would leave crying at the end of the shift. It's already overwhelming being new. And then you have these old battle axe warhorse kind of nurses that are just making it worse. And honestly, a lot of them just needed to retire or move on, but they stay on those units and they make life a living hell, not only for the new grad RNs, but mainly your staff that just wants to come in, do their job, and go home.
or anybody that pushes back at them.
Yeah, and then it becomes vindictive, especially if they're a unit charge or a wing charge, and then they'll do everything in their power to take the least complicated assignment, give the new grad RNs or LPNs the worst assignments, won't help them, won't help teach them, won't be a team member, and they'll just let them sink. Have you ever had that kind of thing happen?
Yeah, they let you sink, and then if you need help or you ask for help, then it's like you're just annoying them or
You're
you're
a
a
burden.
nuisance, and you're learning. You don't have that experience necessarily to exactly know when, yeah, something doesn't feel right, may not be right, but you don't know how to navigate it.
Well, even just to have somebody come in and just put a second set of eyes with that experience on your patient just to make sure that you're not missing something or that you're doing something correct. I mean, like hanging IVs or with blood, you have to have two people in the room hanging it. But, you dare not go to that nurse to help you because, oh my God, it's like climbing Mount Everest. You might as well just go bang your head against the wall. And with all the comments they make while they're in the room with you trying to help you.
I also found at report with these nurses, they expected everything to be perfect, everything tidied up, everything hung. So like there were times where, you're doing, if you're hanging blood, as you use that as an example, shift change, that's one of the worst times to try to hang blood because you're trying to get report on your patients. You're trying to put eyes on all your patients. And then you're trying to hang blood and you can't leave per se right away to leave and go do something. So I had a nurse one time that was so upset because we didn't hang the blood. And I'm like, well, this is a horrible time to hang the blood. The patient wasn't crashing. They needed the blood, but it wasn't like one of those major urgent situations where we needed to get hung right then and there. It was okay if it waited 10, 15 minutes so that they could get their report and get things started. And we even offered to stay around to be that second person to help get it started for her at least. So she winds up pulling another nurse. But no, that wasn't good enough because it wasn't already running and past that 15, 20-minute mark of watching them.
It almost seems like they're never satisfied. They want the easiest transition in. In my experience, they were the worst ones to follow on a shift. They didn't do any of the things that they required you to do at the beginning of the shift. They left the bags empty. They left antibiotics that weren't run. They would have patients that weren't cleaned up. They had discharges that weren't done.
All of them. There were some really good seasoned nurses.
But everybody knows the ones that we're talking about. There's always one on every single unit, and that has been the par for the course in every place that I've ever worked.
Yeah.
There is always one and possibly two. And God forbid if there's two, because both of them usually will team up and they cackle like little hens up at the nurse's station and they make everybody else's life a living hell. Whether it's during report, whether it's during the shift and not helping out and critiquing and yelling, rolling their eyes, making comments, or at the end of the shift when they've left their patients in a mess and you stay behind to help the transitioning nurse or the shift nurse that's coming in after report get off to a good start because they didn't take care of their patients, the last hour of their shift. And they have these expectations of everybody else, but they never, ever live up to their own expectations that they require of everybody else.
You would also get some of them that would want to precept because typically, so night shift, our nurses in our units, they would start day shift because that's the busiest. You learn the most. You get to know the doctors. You get to know the procedures and things, stuff like that. So the night shift nurses, the seasoned ones, would want to take new hires because knowing when they come to night shift, they're already prepared. So they can just sit back and let them go.
Yeah.
Let them do the work. And then they would just sit there and watch and not do anything.
Well, and they would get a bump in their pay too.
Yeah. Yeah.
$1 or $2 an hour. And they would they would sit there and let them flounder like fish out of water.
We also had a nurse that actually every nurse that I'm talking about is this one particular nurse. When I say a nurse, when COVID came around, everybody was like real frantic. They were really worried about taking these patients and it was rightfully so. And it was everybody. It was older adults. It was younger nurses who had kids at home or, just anybody. Everybody was afraid. So her thing is if she came in, when we first started getting these patients, we tried to rotate them until it came to a point where we couldn't rotate. Everybody was taking COVID. But there was a point where you could kind of rotate nurses taking these patients. And she would be up on the rotation and it would be like, why are you giving this to me? I'm older. You should be giving this to the younger, newer nurses. Well, no, that's not how this works. That's not a team environment. You don't do that.
Yeah, I remember her.
That's not right. Or these nurses, they would purposely give the newer nurses the hardest assignments, saying, well, they need to learn. They need to know how to handle this. That's not fair either, because that's how you're burning people out. Just because you're burnout and you don't want to do the work doesn't mean you put it all back on somebody else because they're new and fresh.
Well, and it's just really ignorant to do that in the first place because you're going to end up having to go in and help that new grad RN or LPN, or they're going to miss something and it's going to cause an adverse event. And then your time is going to be maximized in that room instead of just evenly distributing heavier patients among everybody. I had that happen many, many times, similar to when you float to a different unit and you get this shit assignment. And literally and figuratively, they do the same thing to new grad RNs and LPNs. And it's another way of eating your young without the new grad RNs actually realizing it. But you as a seasoned nurse, year 2 or 3, know what they're doing. Or my favorite is they would always get there early and put themselves wing charge or floor charge so that they could get a reduced assignment. And I had one of those actually on my unit, and I ended up knowing when she got to the hospital, and I get there 10 minutes before her just on purpose, just so I could be wing charge or floor charge, and would stick it to her. I would still take a heavy assignment. I would still take first event, but I wasn't going to let her mess with the new grad RNs that I had trained or my nurse colleagues. You're going to take that assignment that you don't want. And I made sure of it every single time I was on shift. I got there 10 to 15 minutes before she did until she finally transferred off that unit. And then our life actually got better. Yeah. So it's really hard out there to explain this. And it does happen in every industry. I mean, I've worked finance in other industries and you can see it. You see newer employees hazing, worst assignments, worst shifts, etc. Some of them have to pay their dues, which bad shifts are just par for the course.
Yeah, you're going to have them.
But the hazing and everything else, I've not quite seen it as bad as I've seen it in nursing towards newer employees.
Yeah, I'd agree. I know when I was training a new hire, even nurses that were coming from like med surg units into the ICUs, everybody assumes, hey, they need to see this. They need the hardest assignments. We're going to give the precept, and your new nurse has an extra set of hands because they have the preceptor. That's not right. You're training these people to be able to multitask, to know what is critical, what is not critical, and how to set up a day and how to adjust to things. Throwing them right into critical situations a week or two into their training is not how you do it. Now, if you're up for admit and your admit is a total train wreck, then yeah, your new nurse is going to be going along for the ride, and you try to train the best you can. There were a lot of times that I would say they would start asking questions and we'd be in the middle of a crisis or something, and I'll be like, we will talk about this after, just go along with me, because you don't have the time to stop and explain what is going on. So just, if you're not unsure, just step back and watch at this point. And we'll talk about this after. We'll debrief on our situation. But automatically giving the worst assignment or putting down people because they're giving a horrible report when they're first starting out, that's not right.
Yeah. Did you ever see management, or did you ever have management intervene in any of this?
Oh, never. And it was one of the things that I would bring up to my management sometimes when we would sit down and talk about our new hires. We would talk about areas that they need to focus on and work on. And I would say, sometimes it was a concern. And every new hire is different. Some could, we were taking more critical right pretty fast. And then there were some that it was just like, you can't give us that assignment. So I would come in, like you would come in early and scope things out. I would come in knowing when I was training to make sure that we were getting appropriate patients for where they were in their learning process. Does that make sense?
Well, yes. And I always did that, especially when I was precepting.
At least to start the shift off. Because I said, by the end of the shift, you could have discharged your whole assignment and then taking a whole new assignment, and you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah. Why do you think management never intervened in situations like that?
Sometimes I think they felt it was petty.
Yeah, but whether it's petty or not, if it's a form of hazing.
I think it was more of a talk to your colleagues about it approach than them actually stepping in approach. Every once in a while, I did have an AM that would come out and make a comment, or during huddle, they would say something like, hey, make sure we're giving appropriate assignments, that type of thing. Or they would say, just come in and talk to them. So I don't know, but They never really stepped in.
Yeah, but they knew. Here's the thing that always got me though. They knew which one were being the bullies, which ones were conducting the hazing.
But I think they had to be careful because you can't just target somebody.
Well,
They might have a conversation with them.
but they allowed the targeting of individuals by that particular nurse that we're talking about. You're that one nurse that everybody knows. And they allow that nurse to continually target new grads and others, but they don't do anything about them.
Right, but I think that it's because there's a process.
Okay.
Like you can't just accuse and do that. You know how it is. You have to paper trail it all.
Right. But for example, when I would go talk to managers about this one particular nurse that gave us issues, they're like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, and yet nothing was resolved. And that's been something that I've seen over and over again. When I worked as an MP at the two hospitals that I would round at, I would go talk to the nurse managers about things that I had seen just to kind of keep them apprised of the situation. And more often than not, their response was, yeah, that's pretty typical. They're aware of it. They know which ones are causing the problem, and yet they do nothing about it. And some of these nurses have been there for 8, 10, 15 years. They just let them go.
I don't know that it's not necessarily they can't always do anything about it. I think their hands are tied to a certain point because, they have their managers they're seeking and talking to, and then they also have HR that they fall back on a lot. Management really falls back on their HR.
Oh, pause. Pro tip. HR is not your friend.
No.
HR works with your nurse managers very, very closely to cover their asses. HR is covering their ass, management's covering their ass. They're both covering the hospital or the healthcare system's ass. So they're not your friend no matter what you think. So that's all I'm going to say. So just be very careful, have everything documented with HR.
But that's why I think a lot of things don't necessarily get done because HR will come back and tell them they can't do certain things or they have to do it a certain way. So that's why I don't think a lot of stuff gets solved, is because they let a lot of things ride because they don't want to bring it to attention and they don't want lawsuits.
Right. But, we happen to be in a no reason state.
True.
So they don't.
To an extent, though.
Yeah. But again, I know they have to paper trail it. But even just in passing, them saying, hey, so-and-so, tone it down a little bit. You're not accusing them of anything, but you're just putting them on notice that, hey.
But I think that's stuff that is discussed during your one-on-ones, your
employee reviews,
your reviews. So I think that's where a lot of that is being brought up. But again, there's a process, and I know that from being in management.
Right.
There's a very, very strategic process that they have to go through. And it's intense. And like I said, they have to work very closely with HR.
Right.
And there are times your hands are tied. Like you cannot address the way you want to.
But I don't agree with it because if they're causing the issues and everybody knows it, a lot of times, a lot of your stress comes from bullying and hazing. And we don't have time to deal with that crap in healthcare, and yet they will let these people percolate on their units for years and years and years and not do anything about it. And another issue is if a lot of these hospital systems, the managers are ladder climbers, so they're not there very long, and so they get pushed off onto another manager, and a year or 2 years goes by, another manager comes in, and it just repeats. And these people persist and they make everybody's life a living hell. And I get where you're saying, but I think you're giving them a little bit of an out.
Well, it's not giving an out. It's factual. But that is how it is, unfortunately. Yeah, and they're all about speak up. We want to hear you speak up and you tell them and nothing ever comes of it. But I can promise you that, and these are for your good managers, because I've had a lot of good managers in my career. They are doing something about it. They are advocating. They're going to their managers. They're going to HR. They are doing stuff. You just can't see what's necessarily going on in the background. Now, am I saying that's the case on every single thing? Absolutely not. But I do know for a fact that things are being done in the background. They just can't communicate it.
Well, no, I know they can't communicate it. I just look at it a different way. because you can be let go for myriad reasons, for cussing out a family member or a patient, etc. So you get one situation and you can be let go. Then they can absolutely fire that nurse if they know that there's even one documented case of hazing. So then what takes them so long to do it?
They can. But again, it's not your manager that can actually fire them. It's HR that fires them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I know procedurally. I'm playing devil's advocate with
I know
this.
you are.
But coming from the business world and before I got into healthcare, this situation would have been like, hey, you know what? We saw you hazing another employee. We gave you one time of a heads up to cut it out. You didn't. Pack your crap, get out of our office.
But you're talking about you worked in a family environment. You're a family-run business.
But I worked in mortgages and a whole bunch of other things.
You were in an organization as big as we were, where there were different tiers that you had to follow. You had to follow that chain of command.
And in my mind, that is one of the main reasons why healthcare costs so much, is because you have all these various levels of management that should be and should solely fall on the manager and one HR representative. If the manager is justified, they shouldn't have to run it up the tree and make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Think back a long time ago, I think that was the case. But now there's all these different tiers of management and so many people attacking the health system, because there are those people that are always going to be those people that are going to sue or try to go after the hospitals and the employees for whatever reason they can get any type of money. So they have to do things in a certain way. Now, do I think they need all of that? All those tiers? Absolutely not. That's just the world we're living in.
See, I could solve it. You put it in the employee handbook at the time of hiring. For those that are currently employed, you make them reread the expectations from the employer with employee conduct. And you have a zero tolerance policy where if you are 100% confirmed to have done a certain action against another employee, you're done. And then you don't have to go through the tiers and all this management structure.
Yeah.
And you cut out a whole segment of expense for the hospital system.
Because you do know that they do, I don't know what, I can't remember what they're like. So say they are being approached for bullying, okay? So they have a conversation with them. They talk to their managers, they talk to HR. The next step would be like a behavioral plan or some type of intervention plan. Yeah. And then they have a certain amount of time that they have to show change and improvement. If they don't show that, then it goes to another phase and then termination. So there are steps, and you don't always know. Oh, individual development plans. That's what they're called. IDPs. Kind of like what you get in school for kids, but only this is in the workforce. So they get these development plans, and then they have a certain amount of time to correct it.
Yeah, see, I'm going to take more of the approach of we're all adults. Everybody knows right and wrong. And sorry about your luck. You know, you don't haze, you don't bully. There's no room for that from day one. And if they do it, they're fired.
I agree with that. But if you go from that approach, then anybody could say, oh, I feel like I'm being bullied. You're bullying me. Okay, you're gone.
I understand that. There
has to be a systematic approach.
It has to be corroborated and substantiated. I get that.
Do I think they need all management to HR? No. I think it should be able to be management, HR, have a conversation. And
nobody knows you better than your manager that is actually on the unit with you. And
sometimes they don't even know you at all.
True. Well, that's a whole nother discussion for another time. But I just think the whole process could be streamlined, and a lot of bullying. There's also a lot of, I don't know the percentages, but there are a lot of new grad RNs and LPNs that leave after a year or two because of this situation.
I agree.
And they don't have an out, or sometimes the units are so understaffed that they can't transfer out because there's a critical need. And so they're stuck in a situation, and they only have two choices. They either quit and go to another health care system, or they get out of nursing altogether.
And I think that might be a lot of the reason why you don't see anything being done about stuff. Unless you're in unions. Unionized organizations, they operate a little bit differently. But in these organizations that aren't unionized, I think they let a lot more things go because they need their staff.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I think if you ask some of the nurses, they'd rather work short-staffed than to deal with some of the people that they're stuck with.
I agree with that. But
it's an unfortunate situation, but a lot of them are
you're
locked in.
you're fighting your upper management on that.
Right. Well, this is a debate that will be ongoing because there's no end in sight of it ever being solved. The only people that can solve it are the next generation of nurses coming in, and to not act the way that these older nurses are treating you and everybody else.
Just
And-
remember, everybody starts somewhere. Everybody starts at the beginning.
And you're a team.
Yes.
Whether you like the person outside of work or not, you're a team.
They're your colleague. You
they're-
need to be able to rely on them.
Yep. There's only a few other industries where this team environment really comes into play. I think the show The Pit really exemplifies that. I mean, as close to a medical drama to real life as you can, that I've seen. And they work as a team. What affects one person will affect everybody. And that's how it should be. So you don't have this bullying and hazing because you have a good solid team structure. There's no time for that. Now, outside of work, hey, you don't like this person for whatever reason, so be it. But when you walk through the doors, you all are on that battlefield. You are in that environment as a team. You work as a team, you end your shift as a team, but you don't have somebody that's an outlier that causes disruption.
Yeah, I worked with nurses that I didn't particularly care for outside of work, even at work, but daggone it, if something was going down, I needed them by my side.
Well, and you're putting service above self. That's like a Rotary model.
Yep.
You are putting your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs aside, and you are putting the patient and you're putting your service to that patient above everything else.
Yep.
And if everybody actually conducted their practice like that, I don't think you would have these toxic work, like as much of a toxic work environment. I mean, there's some other things, but having a work colleague that creates a toxic atmosphere absolutely 100% will drive most people to want to leave or quit.
Agreed.
So be the change on your unit, be the change within your hospital system. Stick up for those that are newer. They're your teammates, even though they're new, and you stick up for them against the people that are putting them down. Anyway, that's the end of the episode.
Yep.
And with that, you are more than your job. You are your family. Get home to them. You're replaceable at work, but you are not replaceable at home. Have stable shifts, but remember your family and your friends are the most important things in your world.
Absolutely.
They cannot be replaced. You are not replaceable. As spring comes around the corner, get outside more, get that sun in your face, put the phones down, read a book,
Go for a walk.
get outside, go to those parks, stretch those muscles, open up those lungs, get some vitamin D from the sun. And the most important thing is, if you haven't done it and you're struggling, work on your mental health.
Yep.
It will be the best gift you give to yourself at any point in time in your life. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Till the next time.
Till the next time.
Bye now.
Healthcare heroes on the grind, underappreciated. Weekend comes, but the pizza's not celebrated. Managers order, they just can't seem to get it right. We gather round, but we're ready for a bite tonight. No toppings, no love, cold slices on our plate. Pizza party, let the podcast begin. Healthcare warriors, let the laughter spin. Through terrible toppings and grease that we dread, we'll keep this conversation alive instead. Chit chat, laughter, it's our weekly unwind. But this cardboard crust feels like a sinister sign. Heartfelt stories wrapped in cheesy regret. As workers unite over this pizza we fret. A slice of happiness, more like a slice of pain.